Hello, everyone, and welcome to the War Report. And God willing, the show will go smoothly. Last night we had a little bit of trouble, but here we are, and we're going to get right into the big story, which is the Israel-Palestine dust-up. Now, I'm sure you've heard that phrase a million times before. Maybe not the words dust-up. That's my coinage. Don't I mean you can use it if you want. Just remember where credit is due. But with that little rambling out of the way, what we have here is there is a coalition government in Israel between Benny Gantz and Benjamin Netanyahu. So Bibi and Benny, I guess.
I like that.
Now that might actually be the episode title. There we go. Rarely do I come up with it this early, but I mean, here we are. Not even a minute in, we got our episode title, and as a result of the past three stalemate elections and the current global pandemic, they have agreed to disagree on several issues and decided to form a grand coalition government in order to, number one, take care of the day to day administrative issues and also issue proper responses to anything that might come up with the pandemic, whether that be border closings, lockdowns, medical research. You know the drill. Now, what we have here is we have uh, them pushing towards the annexation of the West Bank settlements for as soon as this expires, because that is going to coincide with the UN vote on. I know the coalition government and things return to normal in Israel on July 1st, and the vote, I believe, is a few days after the July 1st deadline in Israel, but the UN vote is deciding the fate of are these settlements being annexed into Israel proper, these Jewish settlements in the West Bank being annexed into Israel proper, is that considered acceptable under international law? And they are pushing this rather hard because there's a ticking clock, as it were, especially when it comes to American unipolar power, where the United States' word is law on the global stage. We're seeing a resurgence of rivalries to the United States, such as China, such as Russia, and even some discontent in Europe, as we've seen with the rise of Macron and I would say, some discontent among the Eurocrats, the Brussels elite. Which, I mean, for better or for worse, it's not like it's not like they're the heroes of our movement, if you will. But point being is, what we have now is we have Trump in an election year, we have the British government in a conservative hands, and we have Israel in, I guess, what you could call a desperate situation. So what they want to do right now is ram through a vote when they think they can get it through, because the United States, under the Trump administration, is going to 100% have Israel's back. We've seen this before. We've seen this with the moving of the embassy. We've seen this with the UN votes under Trump. We've seen this with the increase in aid. Not that I don't think the Democrats would have done it. But if you recall, one of Obama's parting shots was in December of 2016. I think it was actually the day after Christmas Day. There was a UN vote to condemn Israeli settlements in the West Bank, and Obama allowed it to go through. And that was the biggest middle finger as Obama was getting out of office, as Trump was about to come in with Michael Flynn. Actually, Michael Flynn talking to the Russian ambassador, it all links back to this, trying to get him to convince the Russian government to delay the vote until Trump is in office so it can pass through the UN. That's what they don't tell you. It's a bit of a convoluted situation when it comes to that one. But what they have right now is they have a now or never moment, at least from their point of view. They view it as, okay, they can get the American vote, as I said, they can get the British vote. China will get into with some of the incident with the Chinese ambassador to Israel. Russia is probably going to be the tough nut to crack when it comes to negotiations. And France, I don't know. Macron has shown some sympathies toward the Palestinian movement and some hostility towards Israel. You recall his state visit to Israel when he went into the church that was technically French sovereign territory, and Israeli
Yeah.
officials and guards followed behind him. He very publicly snapped at them. Now, whether that was a genuine move or whether that was to sort of show dominance to the public eye, to the media, I don't know. So again, I think Macron's the biggest wild card. Russia might be able to be convinced, big word, might be able to convince if there is a concession in Syria or in terms of their relationship with Iran. But point being is, it's much as close as many Zionist elements are to Putin. Russia's government is not like the United States. I'm not saying there's zero influence there, but I'm saying it's a bit more of an uphill battle if they want some concession like that from the Russians.
Well, I mean, to be fair, no government on earth is quite like the American government in that respect. And Macron could have easily avoided doing what he did. I think he did it basically to show their hand. I think he knew how they were going to react, and he did it anyways. I'm pretty sure that's how the Jewish Israelis see it. Yeah, and I guess we should also mention, like, I remember reading this, honestly, like a few months ago, and when we were trying to record this, it only occurred to me afterwards, after like several attempts, that it wouldn't record the stupid program. But Bibi was like very pro Romney in 2012. He wanted Romney in. I'm not saying that Obama was like some base dude that thwarted everything Israel ever wanted. But the fact of the matter was that Netanyahu was not happy with him. Definitely not happy about the JPCOA. That was huge.
Or his inaction in Syria, or his... in fact, right. Funny enough, his coup in Egypt supporting the Muslim Brotherhood did not make Netanyahu happy either. He wanted Mubarak gone, but not that way. The Arab Spring in general sort of, kicked Israel in the ass with all the groups they support, since it was supposed to be these controlled opposition Muslim groups that you have in Saudi Arabia, that you have in the Gulf states. But instead, Obama was like, we're gonna support the Muslim Brotherhood. So, we're gonna have American domination, and Israel can play along, because I'm sure I'm going to steal this point from you, but if you'll allow me, there is a bit of a civil war amongst Israeli Jewish influence in the United States. There's the liberal side, who generally are more reserved, care more about public appearances. How can we slowly do this? How can we appear as the liberal bastion democracy? And then there's the conservative side, that even Netanyahu is a pretty moderate guy on the conservative side, who pretty much want from the Nile to the Euphrates. So those are your two camps there, of course exaggerating for both of them. But
yeah,
the dispute is that the Democrats, of course, align with the more liberal camp, while the Republicans align with the more conservative, outright Zionist camp. And a lot of the Democrat complaints about Israel is that Israel doesn't play along in the liberal world order and isn't a cog in the machine. Now, I'm not saying under Netanyahu or the conservative government they haven't played that role, because they definitely have, but they're mad because Israel will occasionally speak positively about nationalists in Europe, or nationalists in the United States, or show that, oh, hey, here's how you can guard your borders too. You'll see Netanyahu adopt that rhetoric when it comes to Hungary, when it comes to the United States, like, Donald Trump, my friend, should build a big wall like we have in Israel. Like, so it also goes down to internal politics and how they want. Again, it goes back to Red Empire versus Blue Empire, just to put it briefly.
Yeah, and that's a pretty stark relief of Blue Empire, Red Empire. Also, I mean, this is the division amongst Jews has always existed. One is about looking like they are a group that has always chosen the higher moral ground, and when it has come to Israel and the situation with the Palestinians, they have to couch it in such a way that they can explain why what happens in a digestible way, right? But there's going to be apologetics with it. There's going to be some kind of groveling, and because they're afraid, basically, of looking kind of like the very thing that they tend to criticize, right? And liberal Jews, on the other hand, see, I mean, like lots of other liberals and other in other places in the world who happen not to be Jewish, they're looking for like literally a global capitalist liberal order. Um, in other words, globalization as the ultimate fulfillment of both Western civilization and Western civilization developing into a global civilization, right? So that's the utopia that they're looking forward to. It's not that they don't support Israel; most of them do, but they do with certain caveats, and so that's what they're basically afraid of. And you can see that like there's a division that's growing much sharper. So you have Netanyahu basically saying, well, I think Europe should be recognized as a Christian civilization. Like these are like that's definitely a no. Like I mean, even Macron will never make that statement. Of course, we all know Bibi can afford to make those kind of statements. He's not going to be really criticized for that. He's not going to be, because he's not Christian, first of all, and because he's Jewish. So he's got nothing to worry about when he says that. But the idea that doesn't move an Overton window, that doesn't provoke fear on the liberal side of things within Western politics is, I think, to be too dismissive. It does worry. It's kind of like we've gone over this on the show many times that it's not Trump. Trump himself is not effective. He was never going to get anything done that we wanted. But for him to get elected, he had to dog whistle some of our positions, and that's what he did. Now, what worries the establishment basically is doing these very clear dog whistles, getting these ideas out there, ideas like a virus. That's what they're afraid of. And you see that, you see that panic. Now, how does this play out? Are they just going to censor all of YouTube and then it wouldn't have mattered anyways? I don't know. But opportunities are intentionally or unintentionally being placed there that can be taken advantage of. And and nobody understands that better than, I would say, the liberal order. So, yeah, they see this as a time where they're going to have to act. America is going to be more diverse, less willing and less able to project its power militarily around the world. Probably more chaotic in the coming decades, more divided, less ability to have any kind of unity with respect to geopolitics, unless as we've seen it the last 3.5 years, is how does it relate to internal divisions in politics? In other words, are you for or against Russia? Are you for or against American democracy? So we're seeing that kind of division already developing, and it's interesting how the Israelis basically saw this coming very early, probably a lot earlier than many Americans, and so they were pushing for Romney. And Netanyahu thought that Romney would win. He didn't even want to hear that he would lose. PBS actually did a special about this a few months ago. And then I saw most of that, and that's what prompted me to look at some articles. Anyhow, so they were on this already, and that's a chance. That's a chance. If you're going to promote European nationalism or nationalism for various European groups living in other places outside of Europe, well, that's that's going to scare some Jews who don't live in Israel, especially. But it's not just them. It'll be also liberal whites and other liberal groups and other ethnic minorities and so on and so on and so on.
Oh, absolutely. And it goes down to where you made the point that they were really stumping for Romney. They were confident that he was going to win, which admittedly Obama was a weak incumbent. In fact, fun fact for those of you who care about electoral history, Obama is the only president to be reelected by a smaller margin in the Electoral College than he was elected with. Because all other cases, like George H.W. Bush, they just outright lose. You get a smaller margin, you lose. Obama was the only one who's ever pulled an election out through the skin of his teeth. Because usually, if an American president's getting reelected, it's because people like him, people like what progress he's made. Obama, it's because Romney was a weak candidate. And Romney, and to a greater degree Trump, they are signs of desperation for the Likud party, if you will, and the Israeli political apparatus, the Israeli conservative political apparatus, that they have to pull out these people in order to influence American politics, as opposed to, Bush. I think personally he was a moron, Bush Jr. that is, but he was an effective politician. He had a lot of institutional support behind him. He had a lot of this behind him. They would want people like Bush and people like just the establishment Republicans from the 90s to the early 2000s, rather than having to pull out obscure governor from Utah, who's part of a fringe religious group that supports our religious group unconditionally, and celebrity billionaire from New York, whose biggest claim to fame is they told people they were fired on TV. These are not their first choices, and promoting nationalistic groups in Europe, getting cozy with people like Orban and Salvini, this is not their first choice either, because you know what? I don't think those figures are perfect. I frankly really like what Orban's doing. Salvini is more of just a showman at this point with the way Italian politics has gone, but I think they are gateways to something greater, to movements that can actually enact real change. And I feel somewhat the same way about Donald Trump, despite some of my more pessimistic views about the future of the United States. But at the end of the day, these are the last people they want there. And again, they're really scraping bottom barrel putting these people out there.
Right, and just recently, the government in Hungary has now outlawed the legal term trans. So you can't call yourself a trans woman. You're either a woman or you're a man.
The only trans you're allowed to talk about in Hungary is Transcarpathia.
Very good.
I know I made that joke like 2 weeks ago, but
yeah, I mean, those were things that people were legitimately getting just pissed off about for several years, and it seemed unstoppable. It was very demoralizing. I've spoken to parents who were afraid how this was going to impact their kids at school. They didn't want to, to have their kids, frankly, subjected to this. So, and there's no reason to believe other Eastern European countries or other European countries themselves can't push for this as well. Soros has come out. I mean, he's just an emblem. He's not the only one, of course.
Yeah, he's sort of the face of it all. He's the head honcho, but he's got an entire institution behind him.
Yeah, he's a meme, obviously. But the thing is he is representative of an order and of a much larger group of people who, they're wearing their shirts like their T-shirts underneath their business shirts that basically say, "Yes, ask me about my agenda." Like they're laughing at you, right? So that for a lot of people, what just took place in Hungary is actually meaningful.
Yeah, we'll get into some of the stuff with
everybody
Hungary
on the right, but it's meaningful for them.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the road. It's not all the work is done, but it's important.
Yeah, and actually, hold on to the Hungary thing, since I have another story that I can bounce off of that. But just getting back to that general point it's the race against time. You see this with Poland, which again we'll later talk about, yet again calling for an American military presence in their country. Not only that, but calling for them to move the nuclear weapons they have stationed in Germany into Poland. It's the clock is ticking down, and I'm not saying the United States is on the brink of collapse or America's global power will mean nothing in 10 years. I'm saying we're returning to a Cold War state where Russia will be able to enforce its will within a certain sphere. China will be able to enforce its will within a certain sphere. As we gradually see France, depending on how their relationship with the United States goes, and you may think Western countries, Western liberal order, they'll get along. You forget France left NATO for decades upon end. I believe they only rejoined like after the Iraq War, was it? But point being is, it's not going to be a America calls the shots world in 5-10 years. Like I said, they'll still be able to call the shots in plenty of places. Probably Latin America is safe. A slight exception of Venezuela with some of the failed coup attempts there. I mean, really shows really shows what decades of inactivity does to the CIA. They get a little bit sloppy, a little bit lazy, but again, we'll address that at some later point in the fall today. I don't really have any major stories on that, but point being is there's going to be places where we can definitely enforce our will, but there's also going to be places where it's going to be a power struggle. It's going to be a power struggle in the South China Sea. We will face challenges there. It's going to be a power struggle probably increasingly in Eastern Europe, and definitely, as we're seeing now, in the Middle East. It's no point being is we're truly entering a multipolar world, and now is the time for the main benefactors, the main beneficiaries of the American empire, to reap the benefits of being in that comfortable position. It's time for Poland to act. It's time for Israel to act. It's time for the Gulf states to act. And you've seen this going on ever since Trump got elected. Now, I think these moves were in place before Trump got elected, but I think just him being there alone, not anything policy-wise, has put that into overdrive.
Yeah, it's a kind of a consolidation process that's happening. You're seeing a division between East and West EU, and it's not completely like the 2016 Pepe memes or anything like that. This is far more serious and important. It's part of the geopolitical struggle. Eastern European countries, which have heavily relied on protection from Russia, as it were, or even just settling scores with Russia, they are looking forward and wondering, if they're going to be afforded the same amount of, say, security that they were used to somewhere between 10 to 15 years ago. There's no question now, in 2020 that Russia is definitely not the country it was 10 years ago and definitely not 20 years ago. And so they're worried. And that's one of the reasons why Poland is asking for the missiles. I don't think they can use that as leverage against the EU. I think this is quote unquote genuine. Because there's not much that America can give in return, because the truth is America would like Poland to have those nuclear missiles. I mean, if we're being honest, like, both countries essentially want the same thing, and maybe in the eyes of the Polish government, getting American gas and American oil in October, November of this year is, I don't know, maybe that's the payback. Lower prices, I don't know, but both of them agree essentially on the same thing. They are on the same page in terms of the politics of power, on geopolitics, rather than the cultural stuff.
Yeah, which admittedly it's all intertwined, but at the end of the day, you have to zoom out and quite literally look at a map and look at the resources each country has and the ability for power projection. And I think that's really what it boils down to. And again, I want to keep this race against time theme going throughout the episode as we move into Syria.
Actually, if we could just mention a few more things about
Go ahead.
Israel before we move on. So there was that Chinese ambassador to Israel who was found dead. This is a pretty suspicious circumstances. It's being ruled that he died of natural causes. He's 57, going on 58, in his sleep. This seems very fishy to me. As you recall, Pompeo was in Israel a week before, and now he mentioned to the Israelis that America is disappointed with the amount of infrastructure projects that they're working with in Israel that are being along with China. And one of them is a desalination plant that's being built, and another is the revitalization of the port in Haifa, which China will be given kind of an authority status, a port authority status. Now, on the face of it, you might think, well, okay, I mean, that's bad. What kind of an ally is this? But wait, it's worse. So the American Sixth Fleet, which is stationed in the Mediterranean, its home is in Sicily. However, it routinely uses the port of Haifa, which is absolutely ideal for not only the Eastern Mediterranean, but particularly with regards to the Syrian civil war.
And you want to
Um,
wait, hold on, you want to make that worse? Russia's port in Tartus, Syria, and their port leases in Cyprus, and their negotiations with Lebanon, right there.
right. Right. So yes, you can see how valuable this is. So if I wanted to put on my tinfoil hat, I'm guessing America would have probably the motive for this as both a warning to the Israelis and the Chinese. That desalination plant is no joke. In a very hot, arid country that needs fresh water. It's a $1.5 billion project. And for a country that I think is only a few million, that's a sizable amount. Um, so, anyways, but the bottom line is Pompeo is very upset by it, even though he's basically guaranteeing that America is going to support them on the annexation of the West Bank. So, yeah, that's all I really had to say for Israel at this moment.
If you'll allow me to present an alternative theory, now I have little doubt that if this was an assassination and he didn't just drop dead of natural causes, as the media is reporting, I have no problem believing the CIA was involved in some way, shape, or form. But I mean, there's got to be, especially with a lot of the more hard right Israelis, anti-Chinese sentiment. There's got to be where they view them as lesser. Now, of course, among the ultra Zionists, you look into their views on the non-Jewish peoples. It's a very interesting rabbit hole to go down to. We'll put that no less. So I'm wondering if there were elements within the Israeli government, maybe within Israeli intelligence, that were sympathetic to the American case on this, and maybe a sort of plausibly deniable way to get rid of this guy by the United States using internal agents within the country. Now, again, that's just minor speculation. We'll probably hear more about the story. It will be completely memory hold, but hopefully Southfront will put out a piece on this because it seems like they're on top of these sort of things. But yeah, definitely odd, conspicuous. I don't buy the official narrative yet. I'm not going to go out and say he was assassinated. Yes, I'm gonna ride that fence as much as I can. But if I had to honestly pick, if somebody said, "What do you think happened, A or B?" I'm gonna say, yeah, he was probably assassinated.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of where I am, and I just think there's not enough benefits to Israel to assassinate him.
Yeah, I mean,
Like, yeah, you
because
might make a few people happy, but honestly, like, is it worth angering? I mean, why are you in negotiations with China in the first place? I'm just wondering, like, how much of it just. I mean, I'm not ruling anything out, but I think for me, the U.S. has the most to gain from knocking him out.
yeah, and I mean, what sweeter position is there to be in than to be in? I would say a country on the up and up, caught between a gift-giving war between two world superpowers.
Yeah,
I mean, that's quite literally the position Israel is in. Somehow they still managed to lose to Hezbollah. Yet, no, they didn't lose. They fooled them because that was just a drone with dummies in it. But that's probably one of my favorite stories we've ever covered. But with that out of the way, you want to do Syria?
yeah.
Okay, so
Go ahead.
Syria, which we usually start with, we knocked that back because of the big news today. But let me pull this up. Uh, More than usual, you had the ISIS attacks in eastern Syria near Deir ez-Zor, near the Syrian government and SDF controlled border, the red and yellow, of course, as you can see on the key. Uh, and on top of that, in Iraq, right across the border, there were 200 attacks over the holy month of Ramadan claimed by ISIS. Now, as those of you who paid attention to this for, I don't know, since 2014, 2015, ISIS was pretty notorious for taking credit for attacks they really had nothing to do with. Now, that was usually in the West, that was usually elsewhere, but In Iraq and Syria, it's more likely to be that they actually did it. They may take credit for something HTS or any of these other Sunni Islamist groups did, but it was usually them when it comes to this. And then you have the resurgence, of course, in eastern Syria. What this all points to me is we look at a certain set of facts. The United States, the liberal empire, if you will, has been losing in Syria and losing badly, especially since 2013, especially since 2015, with the proper Russian involvement, with the destruction of ISIS, Trump getting elected. Now, I'm not saying Trump completely defunded this, but he cut enough aid to the quote unquote moderate rebels that allowed the ground forces of the various countries, usually the pro Assad coalition, to make progress on this. And to the point where it's these specks on the map that has to resort to these assassinations of intelligence officials sort of attacks. That's what it's boiled down to. And in Iraq, it's a similar story with pro-Iranian groups and Iranian special forces being the bulk of the groups that have fought ISIS. But definitely those brave Kurds. How could we forget about them? Where 25% of their men joined ISIS, and left half their forces end up being their women to fight ISIS. How fun and wonderful! What great allies! We should definitely support their statehood, because I could see no better ally in the region for us. But honestly,
well, talk about the war of the sexes.
oh boy, yeah. Are domestic disputes that bad in Kurdistan, where they take up arms on ethno-religious conflicts? Whoa. Yeah. I
kind of base.
Kinda. I'm not gonna lie. It's definitely interesting, if anything. But what you have here is the United States on its toes in Syria, getting knocked back. You have a similar situation in Iraq, especially after the Soleimani assassination, which is probably one of the biggest backfires in in recent years. It really made no effect on anything. It didn't change anything. We're not toppling the Iranian regime. Iran didn't respond rashly to it. But point being is, it angered the Iraqi population, which I'm sure you all remember, led to the vote for the expulsion of U.S. forces. Now, of course, U.S. forces have remained. And all of a sudden, ISIS crops up in both Iraq and Syria, which is our main mission for being in both of those countries. Now, if you allow me to put on my tinfoil hat, I think there might be something we're not seeing there that leads to this.
Syria's complexity ever grows, and you have the same over. America does legitimately fight and eliminate ISIS cells, but only when they're a threat to the Kurds, not when they're a threat to anybody else. Within Syria, and this goes more or less for other areas as well. Although I have to say that I tend to believe that they do engage with ISIS militarily in Iraq. I'm guessing their hand is forced there, but America is so invested in toppling Assad that they literally will not risk weakening ISIS in certain areas. So you have a lot of these attacks that are happening both south of Damascus and Daraa, and the ongoing stuff that is happening just northeast of the American occupied area next to the Iraqi border in Deir ez-Zor. It's been basically 3 weeks of very effective ISIS attacks, everything from creating fake checkpoints, and they just literally slaughter both soldiers and civilians. Even insane stuff like killing a guy because they think he's a sorcerer. So this has been going on for quite a while. The SDA is counteracting this. They have been quite effective this week. But it's forced to stretch them. And noticeable is how the uptick in ISIS attacks began to occur roughly about 5 to 6 weeks after the recent ceasefire agreement in Idlib. And I guess that kind of dovetails with Idlib, where we can mention that the Turkish-Russian patrols have now extended, and they are no longer just going on to the next town outside of Sarakib, they are covering now like 45% of the road, the M4 that links Aleppo with Latakia. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham has agreed to this. Now it's angered the Turkmen Islamic Party. It's one of these other Al Qaeda affiliated groups that sometimes works or doesn't work with Hayat.
Yeah,
And
it's all these Central Asians that are definitely freedom fighters, and representing the Syrian people. Like,
that's right. It's Chinese Uyghurs. Chinese Uyghurs are like totally liberating
yeah,
Syria from Mad Dog Assad. I just find it hilarious how like
yeah.
Western liberals and Western liberal media are so sympathetic to like Uyghurs, and actually people have known Uyghurs have been fighting in Syria in Al Qaeda cells for like years, and
Hand in
like
hand with the Chechens.
right. So like I see you, CIA.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, and great job, China. Just sure, we're trying to keep this ethnic minority down, which I'm not going to deny that there are. I'm not going to deny most of what they're doing with the Uyghur camps, but again, it seems like yeah, real competent letting your fighters go to Syria. Yeah, great ally of Syria right there.
Yeah.
At least the Russians have kept a clamp on Chechnya. That's all I can say. But point being is, you make the point with Idlib, where Turkey has even been fed up with these militant groups. They've been fed up with HTS and these Al Qaeda affiliates to the point where they're actually clashing with them. And you'll see, as we'll get into a few minutes, they're moving a lot of these forces to Libya.
Right. And some of the clashes have been pretty bad. In late April, let's not forget, Turkey like literally killed 11 of these, anti-patrol M4 patrol cooperation between the Turks and the Russians. There was a protest. The Turks like killed 11 of them, but they have been turned back many times. And I think one of the reasons why Hayat has gone along could possibly be these mysterious drone strikes that are happening all over Idlib. Now, most of when I sort of weed through, some of these YouTube videos and bits of information here and there, the locals tend to believe that these drones are Russian, but it's beginning to look like they're not marked, but they could be actually Turkish. And I would say that Russia is cares less, I think, about being found out that it's bombing jihadis in Idlib than Turkey is.
Yeah, which is why they bomb so many hospitals and bakeries.
That's right. I mean, they're bombing kindergartens. And yeah, so
what's that weapons cache doing in a children's classroom? No reason.
Yeah. So I mean, Hayat is reverses position. We talked about this last week, where they need money and they want to have a financial interaction with the rest of Assad's Syria, particularly with Aleppo City, right? Because they're not getting this support. Now, there's been other jihadi groups, Al Qaeda affiliated, that have been asking, rich, very rich, Muslim millionaires, particularly in the Arabian Peninsula, for donations, and they're not shy to tell them that they need man pads, rocket launchers,
yeah, there's
so
a Saudi
so
prince
on.
to bail us out, right, guys?
Yeah, so obviously it's drying up. Obviously, there's been a kind of a hold on this war. It's not progressing the way they had thought. I think there's been an evaluative process that has taken place, that especially took place, I think, near the end of 2018. And, whether Trump has waffled back and forth, the idea is that, okay, it's not winnable. He is going to stay. So, where do we go from here? And I think it's interesting that the year after, that's when America goes to seize the oil assets as a kind of a countermeasure, but it's not very good projection. Their forces have lost far more territory in the last 2 years. And speaking of that particular area where the oil fields are, this Syrian Arab army actually chased away the Americans again yesterday. The Russians the day before dodged an American patrol. The Russians actually had like food aid for the Kurds, and they managed to evade. They just basically sped fast enough that they could reach the Kurds in time before the Americans could stop them. So this is so that's where the Americans are in that area in Syria, and that to me is like, it's kind of like, yeah, it's a bit of a stalemate, but it's slowly nudging towards an outcome that America is not going to be happy with, and neither will Israel
Well, I'll tell you.
or Saudi
I'll
Arabia
tell you
or
this.
Jordan.
Oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we'll get into some of that more. But I'll tell you this now: the big hesitancy to evacuate troops from Syria has been it would be a massive concession. It would be an admittance of
Yeah,
defeat, something we've not had, at least on that scale, since Vietnam. Now, in terms of American casualties and the impact of the war on the American public, no. But in terms of America's global power and our reputation to foreign powers, yes. But there is also a case to be made. Now, arguing to a neoliberal or a neoconservative for the 1 in a million that might be watching this, is it not more humiliating for American patrols to be chased around by Syrian and Kurdish and Russian forces going back and forth, where these patrols become humiliation parades, than it is just to cut our losses and leave the country? At this point, I think it's more of a stain on America's reputation to have these ineffective patrols only have a few hundred official troops. I think we're down to like 500 or something. Now, contractors, of course, there's like upwards of 2,000. But point being is, in my opinion, it's more humiliating to have our troops just there and completely ineffective than just have them completely just bail from the country and go hang out in Kuwait or be restationed in Europe or somewhere at home, rather than, again, guarding these oil fields that we don't even need.
yeah, yeah. So you know, uh, it's. I mean, I think also for lots of Americans, a lot of these wars have just basically bled into one. Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, the ongoing problems with Iran, even Libya to a certain extent. For many Americans, this is just all more Middle East bullshit. And can we just get the F out? Like, it's not even kind of like, you know, the America that wins the Second World War, rebuilds Western Europe, and, fights against communism in Vietnam, a very long, arduous war with far more casualties, uh, and then leaves, and essentially about a year and a half, 2 years later, Saigon falls, and we know how that ends. But I think in many ways, Americans leaving a theater of war post Vietnam, but more importantly, in the context of Middle East conflicts, that America has been involved in themselves really since Bush Senior. And let's not forget Clinton. There was not 1 week in the entire administration, in the entire 2 terms of Clinton, that he did not bomb Iraq. Like, that was literally 8 years of softening Iraq for an invasion. And so it's been, either a very hot contested war or an ongoing grinding war, uh, literally, for nearly 30 years. And at this point, most Americans literally don't care. Like, it's just not even important enough whether to even discuss whether it was a victory or a defeat. I just
Yeah.
don't even think that mindset is there.
And then the energy boom we had in 2014, 2015, which again is on the rocks because of the recent energy crisis, energy price crisis, I'd say. That's taken an arrow out of the quiver of those who want to justify these wars. We need it so we can secure the oil trade. Well, look, it may not play out this way in reality, but in the mind of average Americans, like, well, we're producing quite a bit of oil. We're an energy exporter. Why do we need to hang out and protect Middle Eastern
Yeah.
oil?
Wait a minute. You just said. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but at this point, the final point I want to make about this is people rightly and commonly associate that Vietnam has made the American public war weary to this day because it was such a brutal defeat, especially coming off the glory of the Second World War and the Korean War and even the First World War and the previous conflicts. America had a streak of, I would say, its post-Civil War foreign policy where it would come out on top every time. It was win
Yeah.
after win after win in both diplomatic and military affairs. Vietnam comes along,
Right.
shatters that illusion. At this point, it makes Americans hesitant to go into wars, but I think it also makes them just as hesitant to leave them.
Right. That's a very important dynamic. That's very true. That's very true. And it's ironic, too, in the last 2 years where Democrats have been more insistent on staying in Syria rather than Republicans. Of course, a major factor in that was the whole Russiagate thing, that leaving Syria was acquiescing power to Putin, who got Trump elected. Like it was in this context.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
think I don't think it, like, especially during Obama's time, there was not this consensus amongst Democrats and self-identifying American liberals who were like, yeah, we really should go into Syria. I mean, it's never been popular. The Western media, both in Western Europe and America and in the Anglosphere, have absolutely failed to engender enthusiasm and support for a war in Syria, the kind that they had hoped for, like on the level of Iraq.
Let me just put this in context.
Long before Russia showed up.
Let me just put this in context. A Republican Congress under Obama vetoed his pretty much what was declaration of war on Syria. Obama wanted military authorization to strike Syrian targets, went to Congress as the diplomatic thing, and a Republican Congress, Republicans in both the House and Senate at that point, said no.
That's true. That's true. But I wonder how much. It's interesting to me. I think he might have thought that his success that he had in Libya, quote unquote success, was going to follow him to Syria. I don't doubt that his administration would have been behind him. I was trying to, and I'm not saying that you were saying that that's what I was saying. Basically, I wanted to just point out that the average American, left or right of center, never had any kind of enthusiasm for a war in Syria, ever.
Yeah. Now, I think what's funny happening, at least among the political class, I think red team of the empire wants to cut their losses in Syria so they can focus on Iran, where blue team wants to double down on Syria and make nice with Iran.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think blue team basically thought, like, we're going to do a gay-off, guys. Let's just do a gay-off on Iran. And we'll have to go hard on Syria, but eventually even Syria will have its own gay-offs.
Yeah.
Essentially that was it. I think also, the idea of doing a gay-off on Iran, which would have been, on a level as long as the kind that they've been trying to do with China and Hong Kong. Part of the reason why I think they wanted that with Iran is Iran, hadn't been in a war for 10 years. Their land wasn't devastated in the way that Syria and Iraq's was. So just from a pragmatic point of view, there's a society that could be malleable, that could be worked on towards a certain end if small concessions were made along the way.
On top of the young population discontent with its theocratic government.
Yes, exactly. That's just not something that's not something available to America in Syria. It wasn't available in Libya, certainly not. And it's not there in Lebanon. Should that become problematic? It wasn't even there strong enough in Turkey, try as they might, right? So, yeah, I would say that there's the Obama administration had a different Middle East policy about how they were going to get to their goal, and I think again, it's sort of what's turning out to be the theme of the show and what you've outlined from the beginning. It's about perception of time, and time is for Likud, for Netanyahu, for both American and Israeli Zionists. Time is running out.
Yeah,
And
they want to act now, and I
yeah,
think that
I mean,
shows in everything.
right. I mean, even in the whole RussiaGate thing, even when you read the text between Strzok and Page, America, we're going to get back America. America rocks. Like these are ostensibly like two Democrats who worked for the CIA or FBI intelligence, blah blah blah. They're literally like a fucking show on TV. Like they're literally those people. They're literally those characters, and they're convinced that time isn't running out. It's a matter of methodology. You don't alienate China. The soft underbelly is Hong Kong. Why are you throwing this away? And yeah, so I think the JPCOA was an attempt to find the soft underbelly of Iran.
Yeah. Now, moving on from that, we have a little bit of news on Libya, as we mentioned earlier. So let's pull that up, get our map on Libya. So, just a brief overview. That's the current situation in Libya. Not that we'll be going into the nitty gritty, but more so the Turkish moves, where they are moving their militias, which they had fight in Syria, into Libya. But funny enough, actually, as we were trying to do the show last night, what we had was a report from the Turkish Minute. Russian and Turkish foreign ministers announced support for Libya ceasefire. Now, Russian Foreign Minister, I'll read it since it's just real quick. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov and Turkish Foreign Minister Cavusoglu, I hope I pronounced that right, probably not, but during a phone call on Thursday, backed an immediate ceasefire in Libya, the Russian Foreign Ministry said in a statement. The two diplomats also supported a resumption of the UN political process in the North African country, the statement said. They spoke a day after the Libyan National Army of Eastern Military Commander Khalifa Haftar said it had pulled back some of its forces from Tripoli front lines, calling into question its ability to sustain a year-long offensive aimed at seizing the capital. Turkey has been backing the UN-recognized Tripoli government in Libya's civil war, while Moscow supports Haftar's forces. So that lays out, pretty much goes back to when we thought the capture of Tripoli by Haftar's forces were imminent, to the point where, yeah, Turkey's moving their forces in there, but it seems like Turkey and Russia have come to an understanding, which, when we talked about Libya last time, further undercuts Western, especially French, influence in Libya. When it was France's project to remove Gaddafi, it was, I believe, Sarkozy at the time who convinced Obama and David Cameron on his operation. They got rid of that.
Mhm.
Most of the heat fell on the United States, funny enough, even though, I'm not saying that, Clinton and Obama should be blameless for this, but all I'm saying is it mainly came from the French that time, and
Yeah.
pretty much Turkey steps in first, Russia follows shortly after, and they completely outmaneuvered the Western powers to the point where no official ceasefire has been announced, but on the diplomatic level, the main two sponsors of the two factions have announced their agreement for it. Now, this is more progress we've gotten in Libya than we've ever gotten in Syria. There's just in one phone call.
Right, and I think part of that, it has to be mentioned that the Turkey supporting the GNA, I think, and they, their forces were up against the wall, but the last 3-4 days, they have been on very good footing, and the LNA is on, Haftar's forces are in back footing right now. They had lost 9 Panzer anti-air systems. These are basically to take out jets and whatnot. And today, 3 of those drones that have been taking out the Panzers have been knocked down. Those are believed to be Turkish drones. But at the end of the day, Haftar's forces have been losing the last 4 or 5 days, and maybe Lavrov asking for a ceasefire is a kind of concession that the eminent victory that Haftar was looking like he was going to achieve is not going to happen. So that's kind of interesting, and of course, it's like we really we really do live in a world with that ideology, because like they're doing the patrolling in Idlib, and that's getting actually better and better. And I honestly never would have guessed it would even get this far. And at the same time, they're fighting each other in Libya. So
I mean, welcome
yeah,
to fourth generation warfare. Russian and Turkish officials can have fruitful meetings while their proxy forces are killing each other in the Middle East. It's honestly, you thought the Cold War was wild, and honestly, a lot of things in the Cold War were wild. You're in for quite a century, so buckle up.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, frankly, I think it's better than the status quo. It is as morbid as that may sound. Conflict is inevitable. It's in human nature. I think everyone understands that. But point being is, I think despite everything, despite all the chaos, we're still seeing some positive shifts, at least in our direction.
Hmm.
Uh, so
Hmm.
so with that being said, I know the French have actually cast their lot with Haftar, so I'm curious what their response will be to this. Now, I imagine there was probably some consultation because, again, it's been France and Russia, so I suppose you're reforging the Franco-Russian alliance, which has existed historically in many periods. But I
Yeah.
guess, I mean, how long until the I know that they were doing it in Syria already, but how long until the Anglo backs the Turkish claims to Libya? Let's just return to tradition, at least in that sense. Bring back the Anglo-French rivalry, Med-Slav alliance. But put the Germanics in an ascendant position in Europe. Let Germany rearm and let chaos reign. but but in all seriousness, you could see developments like that. I wouldn't be surprised tomorrow if Boris Johnson's government came out and said, "Oh, we support the Turkish moves in Libya as a move for peace in the region or whatever." I could very easily see that. The U.S. was tacitly on board with the GNA government and the Turkish moves in Libya. Now, like I said, they pulled out about a year ago to avoid another Benghazi. To Trump's credit, I'll give him that. But point being is, if they were to get involved, they would get involved on the GNA side, which would be an
Hmm.
interesting
Hmm. Hmm.
dynamic between the U.S. and France if they did.
Yeah, that's very true.
But that's all speculation, of course.
Yeah,
Um, I suppose, um, I suppose we'll hit Asia and then close out with some of the miscellaneous European stories that cover the Hong Kong stuff first.
yeah, sure.
Okay, so after about a year of protests, I believe the protests started in this time around last year. Hong Kong has all but been absorbed into China proper. Now, as we chronicled the Hong Kong protests early on, I would say there was actually, at least from my point of view, I don't know how you feel about this. We may diverge on this issue. At least at the beginning, there was something to support there. It was actually mainly older conservatives who longed for the days of British rule, in which, admittedly, I would say it was a pretty, pretty at least materially comfortable time while they were a British-controlled city-state pre
Hmm.
1996 and into like the immediate post years. Macau, the same position, except they were a former Portuguese colony. I think they actually still maintain some semi autonomy, and I think, if anything, they'll be the next target of scrutiny rather than Taiwan, but I'll get into that in a minute. So you had that, but then within weeks, it became the most contrived liberal protest. And funny enough, I think the CIA, I'm not saying they completely control the movement. Now, it's obvious that they're going to step in and intervene and support protest movements. We've seen similar things, maybe not to the same degree, with like Russia posting pro Black Lives Matter propaganda, funding trolls to post that. But again, it all boils down to just this game of nitpicking. So I'm not saying they were completely a CIA op, definitely involved, and definitely wanted that pressure on China. And at the end of the day, what you have is, I think they completely derailed their own protest, but I will say, as an ultimate conclusion, I don't think the goal was for the CIA to incite a massive revolution across all urban centers in China, as some people speculate. Nor do I think it was a completely grassroots movement. My take on this right now is things are at a crossroad. Again, it's that race against time theme I told you that we would come back to. The United States, I would say the very liberal empire part of the United States, State Department, etc., wants to know where China stands. So I think Hong Kong was a test. When they got in the Hong Kong movement, when they started supporting elements of it, it was an ultimatum to China. Do you want to be part of our world order? Do you want to return to the position where we'll support your economy, you can be our manufacturing hub, and you can be part of our global liberal empire, sort of the Brzezinski vision of the world, so long as you help us counter Russia and not break ties with Russia, but go back to 2000s levels, I would say. Or, you can clamp down on Hong Kong. We really don't care. We don't care about Hong Kong. And you can side with Russia and you can seal your fate as an enemy of the United States. And clearly, they chose the path of crushing Hong Kong and sealing their fate as the enemy of the United States, which then resulted in the approval of several arms deals to Taiwan in the immediate follow up to that. And like I said, I think this was sort of China's last chance from the liberal empire. Whose side are you on? You can't straddle this line forever.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I noticed that the protests started, like Pepe was resurrected, and you had like cam girls that were on Twitter. I remember when I was still on Twitter. I remember these Asian cam girls who had Twitter accounts that were all for the Hong Kong revolution, and I thought, this is like, it's a gay, like this is literally so gay. It's like the F I care about whether China has democracy or Hong Kong has democracy. Man, I'm not particularly happy with the way democracy has turned out in European civilization.
Yeah, all I'm going to say in terms of the Hong Kong protest, the Union Jacks and crosses were better optics than the rainbow flags and dildos.
Yeah, but
those
knew
quickly disappeared, though.
Right, like, yeah, but you knew the dildos were going to come out eventually, right? Like, come on. You start seeing American and British flags, they're going to come out. And then you're right. The truth is, like, this was a movement that started even back in 2014 that was, basically by conservative Chinese Christians who legitimately are afraid for the way Beijing made engulf Hong Kong completely. And but then that escalated into something else.
Yeah, I think my biggest...
like 2019, it turned into a gay off. It was like you couldn't have like normal, decent people who are worried about a tyrannical government. It had to turn into like, I don't know, kind of like somewhere between like CIA and Sargon of Akkad level liberalism, right? Like it became just this gay thing. And yeah, of course, Hong Kong has had enough. We remember how many months that they had their troops ready, but they never went in. And I think that, their patience has run out. And I think if you look at it from their point of view, those articles a few weeks ago that were printed about how the visiting American delegation of the Pentagon that was there sent Trump a letter in late November based on what they observed in late October, that there was an epidemic that was forming. Now, how the F would anybody know that there was an epidemic forming there? Like, that makes no sense.
Yeah.
They're talking about this is happening and it's going to get worse. No one at that time had diagnosed this. No one really knew. And that's genuine. No one in China or anywhere else knew what this thing was. The thing is China's going to read those articles if you're going to publish those articles in Western media, right? So in a way, like if you're the Chinese government, you kind of feel validated for all those stories that you had about the Americans planted it here, right? It's not some tight case. I don't think we're ever really going to know what happened. But if you're China, this kind of supports your argument, right? And so I think, they've had enough. And like you say, um, you know, China clamping down on Hong Kong is basically about China's refusal to go along with, the American liberal order, the Brzezinski vision for the West. We've even seen American senators lament how we had hoped that trade, infrastructure, dialogue, political goodwill after decades would eventually make China part of the West, and it never did. They literally never fell for the GAOPS, and in fact, they're too threatened by it because, you can't go on a civilization that just extols, pride parades, cam girls, and tranny reading up.
Yeah,
That's not a civilization you can sustain.
If you allow me to get my anti-Asian sentiments out of the way, because I've been biting my tongue on this, the liberal world order is so unappealing that not even Chinese people want it. Think about that. Okay, and you think these people would be okay, they're sort of made for whatever form of communism they developed. Yeah, they're sort of I'm not gonna say absolutely, but a lot of the way they function is as a hive mind, as a collective. You figure this is a system tailor-made for them, but you dropped the ball so bad that you made it look unappealing. And frankly, that goes back to my point where if you're somebody who genuinely wanted Hong Kong to remain free, which again, I made my position clear. I only really care about, again, those remnant populations that sort of started the protest, in which they had successful negotiations with Chinese authorities several times over. We saw this, like you said, in 2014 and in years before that, ever since the 1996 transfer. What you had there is a workable system with sane actors, at least on one side. I would say, okay, maybe I would call the Chinese sane actors, maybe not the most benevolent, but again, and then you have the CIA State Department come in and completely derail that. So honestly, I'm not telling you have to like or dislike China. Come to your own conclusion. That's honestly why I do the show. I'll say my opinion on China leans more towards the negative side in a lot of aspects. But point being is, if you're somebody who genuinely supported a free Hong Kong, you should be raging at the CIA and State Department for ruining the process that had taken place several times before. Come on, it's and frankly, I'm mad at them and for derailing this process, like I said, which we've seen play out in the past, and it was. Look, you can be critical of CIA operations while acknowledging their successes, but this wasn't even a success.
Yeah, it was bungled. It had to, it could not have this even a conservative Christian element about it, because they would protest after church, or it would be on a Saturday. They were never unruly, and then and they had actually good relations with Lam, the mayor. Who I think, inwardly she was sympathetic to, and and of course, I also want to mention that there's Hong Kong probably has its own bugman class. Let's face it, every country has bugmen by now, and a lot of these stupid bugmen and camp girls, if they didn't exist. The CIA can't foment these movements. The material has to exist there in the first place. And so this level of degeneracy was there. And so it's this association that the West is literally having these, cultural minorities, these sexual deviants as kind of the representation, the litmus test, the shibboleth of what it means to be a Western liberal democracy, or be within that sphere. And so, yeah,
And
the yeah, and ultimately it became very violent. And then, they wanted they wanted more concessions from Beijing. It kind of bungled it, and I think, um, whatever amount of American influence there was, I think did want to capitalize on a kind of a destabilization. If I put my tinfoil hat on, I'm not saying this is how it went down, but if I thought that 2020 would be very bad for China, cough cough, or should I say coof coof, after the protests in 2019, maybe some kind of unrest could be generated. We have plenty of evidence about how America foments these movements both within Iran and Turkey. Like, why would they not do that in Hong Kong? Like, it's not beyond the pale. It's not something that would never happen. So, yeah, they've. I guess I'm just going over points we've already made, but
yeah.
Yeah.
But point being is, if you want to blame anyone for Hong Kong's loss of autonomy, blame the flagrants, I suppose we can call them, in the CIA and State Department, who decided it needed a bit of touch of rainbow.
Yeah, and Bannon. Like, the truth is, in a way, steering the protests in this direction, and of course having the numerous useful idiots to comply with it. Maybe even they came up with some of this. In a way, it's kind of like, again, like, you cannot have the word democracy and liberty associated in any way than the one that so many of us hate right now. Like, there cannot be any other kind of definition or demonstration of those words unless it has this, degenerate culture associated with it.
Yeah. Now, the last point I'll make on the East Asia sphere before we close out with some of our European news topics is, like I said, we did our arms deal to Taiwan, and a lot of people are saying Taiwan will be next, and I think that is a bit of an...
No.
Yeah, okay. I think, like I said, Macau, the Portuguese equivalent to Hong Kong, will be next, if anything, because Hong Kong was something ultimately they were willing to sacrifice, which is why they put so much investment into it and so much support behind it, because they were willing to let it go if need be. Taiwan is a massive aircraft carrier. It's been described as it is pretty much the massive aircraft carrier. It's been very acquiescent to U.S. naval patrols and U.S. military positions. Now, we've never had a permanent military presence in Taiwan, nor do I think we should. I think it honestly is a good wedge when it comes to trade negotiations with China. I'll come out and just put my realpolitik intentions out there. But at the end of the day, China knows that Taiwan will not be conquered. The West knows that Taiwan will not be conquered because simply it is too much of a hotbed. And frankly, like I said, if we can use it to successful negotiations for domestic industry, I'm fully in support of that. Now, I have no faith in the current American leadership or the current American political institutions as a whole that we could effectively use our influence in Taiwan and our military presence in the region to actually accomplish something that would benefit the American people, rather than making sure Taipei can have their pride parades. Like that's what's going to boil down to. That's reality. Whereas my hopes is like, yeah, okay, I can concede having some umbrella over them if it means, yeah, okay, we can extract something from China. But at the end of the day, it's going to be an umbrella for them for gay liberal reasons, which, as it always boils down to.
Right. Yeah, they're not going to. Sorry, they're not. I mean, some people literally live for these kind of alarmist headlines, and because it's basically there just to justify a position, right? That if they could just be right about this one thing, it would prove everything else. Again, it's overly conspiratorial. It's overly reductionist.
Yeah, and it keeps the media busy.
Yes, absolutely. Right. It's good. It's good business. The thing is China is not going to invade Taiwan, even if America kind of removed half its presence in the South Pacific and in the China Sea. China would think very hard before it would go into Taiwan.
Now,
Absolutely.
what I will say,
And no, that isn't to say that China doesn't have a long range plan to bring Taiwan back into its sphere. It does, absolutely. It does want it. But realistically, no, they're not going to have a war. In fact, I would say the amount of American presence might push some elements of the CCP into wanting a war to resolve the situation. But I think China is it's very smart. It's a very smart country. It has and it has it's done an enormous judo move. It had its differences with Russia, the Soviet Union, and it played with America. It got the industry. It knows that for the money, there are no better workers in Asia than in China. Like, if you're going to count the amount of numbers, the amount of competency, and the pay, and you make some kind of final score with each of those, they know very well that, India is not going to replace them. South Korea, Japan are not going to replace them. Philippines, Vietnam, it's not going to happen. Okay, it's not going to happen.
now I
India can be a bit of a threat, but for the high tech stuff, doubtful. So they know what their value is, and they know how many other countries rely on them, particularly other wealthy countries within the EU. Um, and so, they're not going to bungle this up by having a war with Taiwan, because I don't know, like it's just it's such a sort of naive outlook.
yeah, it would take a massive escalation for them to take like any action to that degree. And one last thing I will say, I hope the biggest outcome out of this is Japanese the Japanese. I hope the Japanese government loses some confidence in the United States and actually moves towards a more independent foreign policy where they rebuild their military, where they get rid of Article 9 of the Constitution and become a player in the region, because that really lifts two weights off the U.S. That's the weight of the being the main power countering China and having to protect Japan. I honestly, now, do I think it will happen? I would say it's more possible than ever now. I would say, and honestly, I think Trump has signaled some support of it after Abe mentioned it, like 2018, something like that. But point being
Yeah.
is, I would like another major player in Asia to counteract both the U.S. and China.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Japan has very sincere interests. They live there. That's their neighbor.
Yeah, like I
They're
said, they're in no greater position to play off this new Cold War at both sides.
right. I think the hesitation from America with regards to Japan is that America would go down a certain road, maybe even of cooperation, a frenemy position with China, however temporary, and that would be not good for America. Right. I
Yeah,
think there's that.
I think the big fear is
Kind of in the
Japan
way that
becoming the next Turkey, if you will.
right, or the way that Duterte betrayed the Americans. You know, because she made him an offer he couldn't refuse. But I do think that I'm being simplistic and humorous about this, ironic. Uh, but the basic outline, I think, of the concern is there that if um, if they play less of a role in Japanese politics, that Japan can go in a direction that's not good for America and for American interests in the way that the Philippines is.
Yeah, and I do think we're putting ourselves in a position. I think the course has already been charted where there will inevitably be dust ups between the United States and Japan just because of the way we've shaped it. The I would say overmanagement we've had of them and not really allowing them to determine their own destiny. And then again, with I think the Hong Kong thing is somewhat of a stain on the reputation of American Asia with how much verbal support we put behind it, only to issue no other reaction than to sell arms to Taiwan. But again, the future will tell. But at some point, I don't think things bode well for America in East Asia. Is all I'm going to say.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem anybody in Asia is willing to challenge China, especially on all these disputes. The commercial, not just the commercial routes that are being used. I mean, the extended UN recognized economic zone in waters beyond the 200-kilometer range from the shore. Like, there's no one that's challenging that, and I mean, I can objectively see why many Americans and Europeans see China as a threat. Like, what the f? Why isn't how are all you guys folding? But all I'm saying is, as well, there's lots of other stuff that goes on where our side gets certain leeway and it's uncontested, or some of our allies do horrible things and it's uncontested. Like, you know,
Yeah, it's not an ideal situation all around because there are legitimate concerns about China, but as you see with everything, the neoconservatives are hijacking this in direction and making it homosexual.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, also the whole John Kennedy, the Republican senator, who said, I wouldn't turn around. I wouldn't turn my back on China if it were dead for 2 days.
But with that out of the way, oh boy,
Calm the f down. Like, the virus isn't even serious. It's a effing flu. So no, it was up to like, I love how it's just the flu. And oh my God, China ruined us. They killed all these Americans. Like, which one is it?
yeah,
Which one is it?
yeah. Like I said, at the end of the day, they took a really good case they had against China in both these situations and somehow completely bungled it. I don't know how. I've never seen more incompetence in my life.
I know.
But moving on from that, last 10 minutes or so, we brought up some of the stuff with Hungary and how they were cracking down on the LGBTQ CIA rights, and this story coincides with this. The U.S. State Department put $700,000 into Hungarian media and demanded programming against Orban and Hungarian nationalists. Now, they openly admitted this. This was not leaked. This did not come out from some anonymous source. The U.S. State Department admitted that they were doing this. Now, of course, do I think this is at the direction of Trump? No. At the direction of Pompeo? Possibly. But again, the State Department is a functional apparatus of its own, and there. Look, there's two models for nationalism in Eastern Europe and Europe in general for the United States to look at going forward. There's the acceptable model in Poland, where at the end of the day they still kiss the ring. Then there's the unacceptable model in Hungary, even though they haven't come out explicitly against it yet, at least not the Trump administration, where Hungary is too willing to act in its own interest, negotiate with foreign powers such as Russia, stick to the EU, and really shake things up. Whereas Poland, they'll have their nationalistic demonstrations, but at the end of the day, they're a staunch NATO ally. And those are really your two examples there, which is why you see so much praise heaped upon Poland, while Hungary is either ignored or in some cases downplayed. And we're seeing this yet again, and I do think they fear it. Hungary could be a, getting back to the Balkans. I know slightly north of the Balkans, but again, another powder keg in the Balkans. Something might spark. It's like, if the Hungarians can do it, we can do it, and that spread. Those ideas spread to the neighbors in the region, and maybe even make their way westward. I mean, I think the West is a bit too liberal for it right now, but these things can change fast, and if not, take over. These ideas can take a foothold. Okay, so Hungary stands up against transgenderism. Who says that? Okay, maybe not Poland is next, but who says Slovakia isn't next? Who says that doesn't stretch into Slovenia and the rest of the Balkans? And maybe even they don't even get in Italy, but there's sentiments pointing towards that in Italy, which is the gateway to Western Europe when it comes to these sort of geopolitical situations, social situations too. And all of a sudden, you have a bit of a rebellion against the newest liberal value they've been propping up for the past 5 years. Now, of course, that's a long shot example. That's a lot of projection in the future. But my point stands is I do think even among the conservative, the nationalist elements, faux nationalist elements, I should say, in the United States, there is a bit of fear of Hungary and Orban that their example may start something in Europe that they can't control.
Hmm. Yeah, I think so. I mean, it was a gamble, like we say, like we've mentioned. Netanyahu is very cozy with these guys, and uh, in a way, I think even in America itself is kind of stuck between what's good for Israel, especially with respect to Blue Empire, um, less so than Red Empire, and they see that there's a cost of going in this direction, because steering it back around later, which is possible, right? They can sort of flip it on a dime, but maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration. I don't think it's as easy as that. It
At
would
least not
take a few
anymore.
years. What's that?
At least not anymore. I mean, maybe a few years ago.
Yeah, I don't think it's as easy right now. I think the situation, like people 10 years ago weren't talking demographics the way they are talking right now. 10 years ago, there was concern about migrants, there was concern about immigration, there was concern about refugees, and of course these endless, Middle East wars. All of this is so much more front and center. All you have to do is just look at the way Western European liberal media has reacted to all of this. They've had to pull out the Nazi card relentlessly, really just to sort of moralize people back into their fold, right?
Yeah, worse yet,
And we
they've had to
see,
concede like Macron. Like they've had to give up on some
mhm,
of the migration
yeah,
positions.
yeah, and that's really not where they've wanted to be. And now you have, Britain leaving, and when this organization becomes less of an economic powerhouse, you're going to see people much less uh, malleable, shall we say, to some of the propaganda that's originating from their media sources. Because as soon as things start to get really hard, these liberal values, which tend to be associated with highly wealthy societies, you're not going to see the same amount of support for them. And frankly, I mean, the disgruntlement with a lot of these massive cultural shifts that have taken place in the last 5 years have been just because of that. It hasn't been because society has gotten poorer. It's because that there is a consensus. I would say where half the population feels enough is enough. And so concessions have been made. That's why I said early on in the show that, you know, you aren't in control. They ultimately are in control, but you do have some room. There is some maneuverability. There is a gap that has formed. So
Yeah.
that's.
Now, one last story I want to cover is also about Hungary, and it takes a bit more of a humorous approach because on last week, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban made a Facebook post wishing students good luck on their final exams, and on that, like it was just like a stock photo. It looked like just a stock photo of a globe, except on the globe, the Hungarian borders were that of the Kingdom of Hungary, which was dissolved in 1920. In which, you know what, that treaty? Let me check. Let me check the date here. I believe expires in 13 days. Yeah, expires in 13 days. Hungary will have full right to reclaim their pre-World War I territories, God willing. But so the Croatian and Romanian governments actually both denounced this. Now the Croatian government said like, okay, what's going on? Whereas the Romanians, who have I think what is it, about 500,000 Hungarians in Transylvania, we're a little bit
Yeah.
concerned. Now I think again that's all like sort of ridiculous. Just sort of there's not really anything to do in international politics, so they're making you know, they're raising ire about this to play up to their respective constituencies because, of course, you can play up the, well, look, Hungary is trying to, subvert our territory as proud Romanians. You can play that up, and the Hungarians can say, look at all those Hungarians that are trapped abroad. Now, admittedly, there are a lot of Hungarians trapped abroad because of the post World War I peace treaties, and honestly, I do think it's a very messy situation. And the reason I bring this up, I actually want to segue in. I could see in the next few years, which I mean, you've seen it with Russia. You've seen them offer fast track citizenship to Ukrainians or citizenship to ethnic Russians from specifically the former Soviet Union and abroad. You've seen a lot of Russians from Central Asia return to the modern Russian Federation. I could honestly see Orban implementing a system where he offers citizenship to these Hungarians that are in Slovakia, that are in Romania, especially now that he's got the birth rate up through his social programs to a reasonable rate. And again, that doesn't mean Hungary still isn't hurting the population. Bring in actual Hungarians. Bring in these people who have been separated from their homeland for 100 years.
Right. And and he, his methods will be noticed. So one hopes wherever that's possible elsewhere in another European country that similar measures will be taken.
Oh, I can't believe that that Serbia just annexed half of Bosnia. Oh no. Again.
It's just Balkan
Yeah,
things.
just Balkan things. Oh, yeah, but I could see um, ethnic ethnic repatriation movements taking off if Hungary does it, because again, with a lot of the German ethnic repatriations that was done by force after World War II, which look, honestly, that was a bloody process. A lot of bad things happened then, but ultimately, you could say in the end, it made things much more peaceable for both Germans inside and outside of Germany to the point where they could be united as one people. Not that that matters much because their country's been completely subverted, but I mean, with that out of the
Yeah.
way, but like returning your people to the borders of your modern state, I think is a completely healthy idea and should be something that is normally practiced. And it's a great slap in the face to the people who say we need more migrants because our population is too low because people aren't having enough children. You need migrants? Why not bring the migrants who speak your language and look exactly like you?
Right. And I love how all these groups that say we're low on population and we need more migrants are also the same people that think it's disgusting rewarding women or incentivizing women with tax breaks and loans on houses the more children they have. Like, I love how that's insulting.
Yeah, the
Like,
exact same
they're
policies
also,
they have in Sweden, no less. Keep in mind, but
yeah,
actively see putting the financial incentives out there, they can tolerate. That's good liberalism. That's social welfare programs. But saying, running a propaganda campaign, well, not even propaganda, but running an ad campaign of a man and woman and two kids sitting there who just also happen to be white. That is, if you consider Hungarians white. We're not going to get into that. We're not going to bring up those controversial questions at least at this moment. That's unacceptable.
yeah.
But I think that covers everything, and I think that's a good note to end it on.
I thought we were going to maybe do France.
I think we'll see the
No?
fallout from that next week, and because
Okay.
that was a more recent event, and I didn't see much about that, so we'll probably touch on that next week.
Okay.
But
Okay. Sounds good.
I do think we found a pretty good note to end it on with are Hungarians white? You be the judge.
Yeah, sounds good. All right.
So thank you everyone for tuning into this episode, and goodbye.
Thank you.